Office Hours. This is Sara.
And I'm Elise. We're coming to you from the headquarters of Dismantle Magazine.
That's right.
And Sara, what's our question for today?
Today's question is from Lynn, and Lynn asked us a great question. She wants to know, is Juliet in Romeo and Juliet a feminist?
What a great question.
Isn't it? What I liked about it is that it gives us a chance to do the most professory thing we can, which is to actually talk you through the question rather than answer it for you.
Yes. Because this is one of the, I think, the biggest things we do as instructors is to help students and guide them into asking questions.
Right.
Rather than just, because sometimes the question is just as or more important the answer.
What I think is that we're actually dealing with two separate issues here. First, if you want to know if Juliet is a feminist, are you asking what it meant to be a feminist in Shakespeare's time? Because you have to then look at it in historical context. But secondly, you get to kind of a more interesting question, I think, which is how can you do a feminist reading of a historical text without being anachronistic? Anachronistic means, what does anachronistic mean?
Well, I think in this particular context, the way we're talking about it, it would be like applying, our own definitions, our currently existing definitions of feminism, to a different historical or cultural context.
Right.
Which is inappropriate, really, when it comes down to it, or it's just not, doesn't really work, because our definitions of feminism come from our social and cultural context. Be very different from what feminism would mean in another time and place.
Right, and honestly, in England, in the Shakespeare's day, the idea of feminism didn't really exist. It didn't mean that women didn't have certain kinds of power that were connected to their gender. It just meant that this concept of feminism is a very modern concept that doesn't really apply to a fictional character from 500 years ago.
Yeah,
right?
when people say feminism today, what they tend to mean is a very narrow definition that really only emerged in the last 200 years or so, with the emergence of democracy and ideas about principles of freedom and individual liberty, and not that those things didn't exist in other times and places, but we have a very specific understanding of that and how that has informed ideas about feminism.
So what I would encourage you to do, Lynn, is to actually reframe your question so that you're doing something a little bit different, which is doing a feminist reading of a historical text, right? So you start asking different kinds of questions about the text. And those questions might be, why do we still read Romeo and Juliet now, even though it's 500 years old? And what does it mean for women to read this text now? You might think about the shifting gender roles from the time that the play was produced, right? All men would have performed the play originally. There would have been no women on stage. So what does it mean to have women playing a role that was written as a woman but for a young man to play, or something like that?
Very interesting.
Yeah.
What kind of, with the second wave feminist movement that started in the 60s and 70s, many feminists, literary critics, they started looking at, kind of feminist readings of different texts that had never had kind of a feminist reading or interpretation. So it'd be interesting to kind of, as a research project, to help you kind of get into this question, see how other scholars have actually tried to answer this question.
That's a great idea.
And what that does. And so that comes back to always being able to kind of ground your question asking in research. Questions always come from kind of foundational research, and then that gets you to a new place. Figure out, is Juliet a feminist, or is that, something we want to think about?
Yeah. So how can we use feminism to understand Romeo and Juliet better? So thanks, Lynn. That was a great question. And tune in for more office hours, and subscribe, like, share.
Go to Facebook, tweet it out.
Elise loves Facebook.
Sorry.